Terrarium Organum, the fourth logic. If the terrarium is our enclosure, then the work ahead is to look at its parts. We've discussed light, visibility, joining, gravity. This is part 4, consent as the fourth logic. Love without consent is not love. It is possession in disguise. Light can see without mercy. Union can hold without freedom. Therefore, consent crowns them both, turning sight into compassion and union into care. Consent is the crown of the Trinity, the principle that redeems what light and joining cannot. Where light reveals and joining binds, consent liberates. It separates higher will, sovereignty, from lower will, where possession, coercion, and manipulation masquerade as love. This principle is figured in myth as Christ, the liberator, or Lucifer, the rebel, the archetype of refusal, of saying no to illegitimate authority. Consent cannot be weighed or certified from the outside. Every bond has its pressures, every yes its shadows. Contracts, signatures, these can be manipulated, forged, coerced. There is no metric that proves a will is pure. This does not weaken the logic, it deepens it. Consent is not a checkbox, but a vigilance, a discipline of witness. Its truth lives in lived relation, not in the form. The impossibility of external quantification is not a flaw, but the very reason consent must be crowned. The paradox of existence is revealed most starkly at birth. Light exposes us to the world before we can will to be seen. Joining ties us to parent and kin before we can choose to be bound. We are all born without consent. This is the primal wound. The terrarium begins in violation. From this fact, some argue for refusal. If entry is coerced, then the only moral act is to prevent entry, to deny new sparks the terrarium's terms. That refusal contains a clean insight. It punctures the sentimental lie that birth is pure gift. It names the asymmetry at the foundation. But refusal cannot be the whole ethic because it is not a livable end state. If everyone simply stopped, the result would not be a purified world, but a collapsing one. Care systems without caregivers, infrastructure without successors, knowledge without inheritors, the old and sick abandoned by arithmetic. Stop is not a plan, only an emergency brake. It names a violation by threatening extinction and leaves the already born to endure the fallout. The fourth logic takes the diagnosis and remains for the aftermath. Consent does not undo the primal violation, but it can refuse its repetition. The question is not only whether life should begin, but how life can be met without reenacting the terrarium. How to build exits, widen choices, reduce coercion, and treat each person, born without asking, as sovereign anyway. We begin in violation. Our task is not to sanctify it, but to live as if sovereignty can still be made real. Some relations echo the imbalance endlessly, repeating the wound of non-consent. Domination dressed as love, possession disguised as protection. Some, rare but real, begin already in balance, where healing has prepared the ground and boundaries are honored from the first spark. Consent is the crown, whether at the start or the end. To begin in balance is the work, and to bring balance out of imbalance is the work. The path differs, but the law is the same. Consent cannot prevent conflict. Two sovereign wills may oppose one another, each saying no to the other. Whose consent matters more? The stalker may not consent to losing their victim. The tyrant may not consent to the loss of subjects. Here consent reveals its second law, the law of suffering. A will that demands the suffering of another without their consent is lower will, no matter how fiercely it insists. Sovereignty does not include the right to violate sovereignty. Where wills clash, the one aligned with suffering reduction crowns the other. Why suffering? Because almost no one consents to suffer for nothing, to suffer without meaning, without context, without choice. This is nearly always experienced as violation. Suffering is therefore the measure of will's integrity, and yet the paradox holds. People sometimes choose suffering. A parent accepts pain to save their child. A seeker endures ordeal to gain insight. But this suffering is chosen. It is bounded and crowned by will itself. The distinction is not between suffering and pleasure, but between suffering imposed and suffering offered. Thus, suffering reduction and consent are one law, to reduce what no one would choose, and to honor what someone may choose freely. Negative utilitarianism grounds the crown, not the pursuit of happiness, which can trample others, but the refusal of unnecessary pain, which almost no one would accept. Consent crowns all. Compassion without consent becomes possession. Justice without consent becomes tyranny. Consent is not an ornament added after. It is the root that makes compassion true and justice real. And this is the end of part 1, the logic. Light joining consent. If you're lost, also please check out my part 1, my introduction. And now we get to move on to part 2, the work, the practice. How do we put all of these concepts, these different parts of the terrarium into practice? The next video will be the foundation of the practice, which I like to call spite. And I hope I see you there. Toodles!